The project I'm going to talk about today is acoustic and psychoacoustic correlates of perceived vocal strain. I'm David Eddins, and my co-authors are Supraja Anand, Madison Dyjak, and Rahul Shrivastav. The theoretical framework that we've adopted for studying voice quality really builds on what is known about sound quality in general, with the notion that voice quality is a special subset of sound quality, and that the principles that apply to sound quality may also extend to voice quality. And we've leveraged this approach to understand more about vocal breathiness and vocal roughness. And today we're going to focus on vocal strain. What do we know about strain? Well, certainly we can define it as the auditory impression of excessive vocal effort. And it's hard to have much of an academic discussion or clinical discussion of the strained voice quality without vocal effort becoming one of the terms that's being bounced around. And in fact, when you're instructing listeners to judge strain, vocal effort is a really good concept to introduce. We've conducted a few preliminary studies trying to get a handle on the perception of vocal strain. One of the studies, we used a magnitude estimation procedure to judge the perception of voices that varied from mild to severe strain. And then we used a model adopted from sound quality, a model of spectral sharpness that focuses on the spectral edges of a stimulus and does a computation based on the internal representation in the auditory system. And with that, what we found is that the model captured some aspects of the data, but really couldn't span the full range of severity from mild to severely strained voices. And so we undertook a second study. In that case, we used rating scale measures, a 1 to 7 point rating scale. And we were able to quantify the perception of strain in 28 voices. However, the intra-judge reliability was not nearly as high as what we think we can get with magnitude estimation. It was on the order of 0.59. Nevertheless, the data were somewhat orderly, and we were able to account for a fair amount of the variance in the data using a combination of Cepstral measures, spectral measures, and our sharpness model, so adding to the sharpness model itself. And in the context of these experiments, we really gained a great appreciation for the complexity of voices that have strain. And in many cases, those voices have other voice qualities that are quite prominent, including roughness, including breathiness, and other percepts that you can use a variety of terms to describe. And we thought if we really want to have a good handle on strain, perhaps we could take a more stepwise approach. And we often referred to the stimuli just anecdotally as stimuli that were sort of clean strain and those that co-varied in other qualities. And so we thought, well, why don't we do an experiment where we separate stimuli into two classes, clean and co-vary. And so that's exactly what we did. And so our goals really were to measure the magnitude of perceived strain with the notion that magnitude estimation has worked quite well for us in the past in judging the perception of breathiness and roughness in dysphonic voices, as well as their covariance. And so we thought the same should be true for clean strain and possibly for co-vary strain. And then we wanted to take some of the same approaches we mentioned previously to try to determine objective correlates of strain, which I'll explain a bit more in a moment. So in that context, we had a very large sample of voices that exhibited the strained voice quality. And we had two expert judges reduce those samples down to 18 samples that we judged to be clean strain, that didn't have strong covariance of breathiness or roughness or any other percept, and 18 voices that co-varied in strain and breathiness. Roughness was not a predominant perception with these voices. And we made sure that these voices spanned a fairly large range of strain from mild to extremely severe. So those were pre-selected. We had 9 listeners who were normal hearing, relatively young, and native English speakers. And the experimental protocol was fairly detailed, but we started with a familiarization process just to make sure that they understood the magnitude estimation task. So we didn't use any aspect of voice specific in the familiarization task, just a loudness magnitude estimation procedure. And then we embarked on our strain evaluation, first starting with clean strain in session 1. And to get our listeners quite familiar with the concept of strain and to make sure they understood how to judge the magnitude of strain, we underwent a ranking experiment, visual sort ranking, where they sorted the stimuli, the 18 sounds in the clean strain group, from least strain to most strain. And when they were able to do that pretty well, then we had them practice the magnitude estimation task one more time with the strain samples. And then we completed 3 blocks of 10 repetitions for each of the 18 sounds. We did the same thing in a second session with covary strain, where the covariance was with breathiness. And these are the data, the clean strain data on the left, the covary strain data on the right. The magnitude estimation is on the y-axis, and stimuli the 18 sounds are listed on the x-axis. The little inset on the left panel shows the user interface. Subjects were judging then the magnitude of perceived strain of each of these voices, and they did each voice sample 180 times. So we got very nice data, and then averaged it, which is shown here by the circles across the 9 listeners with the standard deviation. And you can see across this set of 18 stimuli, the magnitude of strain varied considerably from least to most. And importantly, the intra-rater and inter-rater reliability was extremely high for this magnitude estimation task, at least for these 9 listeners. When we move over to covary strain, we see that the data look very similar in the sense that we were successfully able to select a wide range of perceived strain from least on the left to most over here on the right. And the intra-rater and inter-rater reliability, again, was quite high, 0.93 and 0.94 respectively. So with that, we embarked on a sort of computational exercise where we had 4 different types of spectral measures, spectral moments. And spectral moments represent sort of a hierarchical statistical analysis of the distribution of power across frequency, or the spectral power. The Cepstral peak prominence, which is a relative measure that captures both variability in the power spectrum and periodicity in the power spectrum. Our model of sharpness that we mentioned earlier from the psychoacoustics world. And then estimates of pitch height and pitch strength following an auditory processing front end, where pitch height captures the perceived extent of pitch, and pitch strength the salience of pitch. In our analysis of spectral moments, I won't spend a lot of time on them, but we had 6 different measures, and we represented those measures on either a linear scale, a logarithmic scale, or 2 auditory-based front ends, an excitation pattern front end and a specific loudness front end. More details than I can get into today, but we then subjected the perceptual data and these analyses to a stepwise linear regression. And we wanted to see which of our measures could account for, best account for the perceptual data. So we have clean strain here on the left and covary strain on the right. And you can see for clean strain, the Cepstral peak prominence accounted for about 50% of the variance in the data, which is quite remarkable. And then adding our logarithmic transform of one of the moments accounted for 14% more of the variance, and adding pitch height to that, again, another 13% of the variance. For covary strain, the predictors were slightly different. Our auditory-based pitch strength measure captured about 50% of the variance. And then adding another auditory-based loudness measure, and finally CPP, got us up to accounting for about 83% of the variance in the data. Now we know Cepstral peak prominence is really good at estimating the overall severity of dysphonia, but doesn't necessarily map the separate voice qualities independently. And so we thought maybe we should consider our linear regression without CPP. And so we did the same thing, clean strain on the left and covary on the right, but without Cepstral peak. And you can see in both cases, pitch strength accounted for about 50% of the variance in the data. And then adding our loudness-based measure and a loudness-based measure plus one of the first moment transformations led us to account for as much as 64% of the variance in the clean strain and 80% of the variance in the covary strain. So what we've learned from this study is that perceptual judgments of strain are highly reliable, both within and across subjects. And those perceptual estimates and the associated magnitude of strain are similar for both clean strain and strain voices that covary in breathiness. Our auditory-based analytic methods explain a bit more of the variance in the perceived strain than acoustic measures, but our best predictions combine both auditory-based and acoustic measures. And with that, I thank you very much. I thank the Voice Foundation for doing this online version, and I look forward to seeing everybody in 2021.